You know what? I realize now that we don't really get a whole lot of sports movies nowadays. We especially don't get sports movies with hyper complicated throuple relationships. Let's get into it.
Come here. Which one of us? This is a game about winning the points that matter. I don't need to play mind games with you.
So I'm going to do this video just like the last one. I'll give you my verdict in the beginning, and then after that, we'll get into some spoiler talk. Right off the bat, I can say Challengers has some superb acting. Zendaya, Mike Feist, hope I'm saying that correctly, and Josh O'Connor, they bring their A games to this film through and through. It's very brilliantly acted, and it's really the selling point of the entire film. Well, until you get to the fact that they're essentially a throuple and the backdrop is super competitive tennis, which is always awesome. And they really hammer home the whole tennis concept because the story goes back and forth as if it were a competitive tennis match. Like it's bouncing between the past and the present, and then there's like some middle areas there. It's an insane watch, but in a good way. And everything builds up as a competitive tennis match would, and it crescendos into a satisfying ending. Quite frankly, like I really enjoyed this one. So the verdict for Challengers is an unapologetically legit film. It's a 4 out of 5 for me. Definitely worth your time. Go check it out. Now, from this point forward, we're getting into some spoilers. I won't be too long. I just want to kind of talk about the central relationship between the three characters and how well executed it is. Right off the bat, we get into our main characters. Art is played by Mike Feist. Patrick is played by Josh O'Connor, and they both are doubles champions of this tennis tournament. And Patrick tells Art, "Hey, let's go check out this other tennis burgeoning superstar by the name of Tashi, who is played by Zendaya, of course." And Art doesn't really know a lot about her, but Patrick kind of drags him along, and both of them almost instantly falls in love with Tashi for different reasons. Patrick is more focused on how great of a tennis player she is. Like, and she's a badass tennis player. Like that opening match where you're introduced to her character as an athlete, she is killing it. Like she's a badass, and it's a well shot scene, and you can see again the developing of the love of the game within Patrick. But on the other end, you see Art, and Art is truly in love with her, like everything about her hair, the way she looks. To me, it kind of came off as if he wasn't even paying attention to how she played, more so of just admiration for how she looked, and that's only further exemplified when they actually meet and Art is like struggling to even talk to her. Like he's so enamored with how she is. Whereas Pat, when he meets Tasha, he's talking about the game, but he's kind of flirting and it's just coming natural to him. And by the way, Patrick kind of comes off as your prototypical playboy, and Art is the shy, bashful kid. Somehow, both of these fellas get Tashi to agree to come back to their rooms. And once she gets there and they start drinking a little bit, the sexual tension is palpable. But what's interesting here is it's not just between Tashi and Patrick or Tashi and Art. It's really the three of them. And that opens up some pretty interesting avenues. Now, there's a lot more teasing than execution here. Like you don't get a threesome between the three of them or anything like that. But an interesting thing is Tashi does kind of fool them into kissing each other. And what stood out to me was neither of them really freaked out once they realized they were kissing each other. Like they weren't angry or anything else, and they kind of just moved on from it. So that was something that I thought was interesting at the time, but the way it plays out over the rest of the film, it makes sense in the moment, especially when you get to the end. She doesn't sleep with either one of them, and she tells them, whoever wins between the two of you the next day in this tennis match gets my number, and that sets the groundwork for three people who will be intertwined for what comes off as about 15 to 20 years. Patrick being the better tennis player, he beats Art. He gets Tashi's number, and over time they date, and they really get close. Like they become a legitimate couple. Tashi and Art actually end up going to Stanford together, and one day, uh, Art kind of not really shoots his shot, but he kind of throws Patrick under the bus and insinuates that Patrick has some other women that he's dealing with, in which sounds like it's true. I mean, Patrick kind of comes off like again this playboy asshole type dude, so it makes sense. And of course, Tashi doesn't care to hear that, but she also lets Art know that he's an asshole. And after that, you get the next interesting layer of this story. Like Patrick doesn't care and is actually kind of turned on that Art tried to take Tashi from him. And again, there's some kind of tension between these guys that feels oddly romantic and competitive at the same time. It's really weird. And then on the other end, we get Tashi and Patrick, and they're getting ready to have sex with each other in a dorm room. And she kind of just, instead of like focusing on the sex itself, she's bringing up essentially how Patrick is wasting his talents, and he should be more competitive since he's already pro and she's in college. To which Patrick brings up, well, why are you not pro? Because you were good enough to go pro, and it looks like you just want to kind of stunt and show your prowess off against weaker competition. And then things get really interesting. Long story short, Tasha gets hurt after this argument during the tennis match that she had immediately after. And Art is there for her. And Patrick, he was off, he stormed out. He was pissed off or whatever the case may be. And when he came back to talk to Tashi, both Art and Tashi kick him out. And that essentially causes at least Art and Patrick not to speak for quite some time. And then you go on to find out that the injury was catastrophic and she won't be able to play again. And this leads to Art and Tashi starting to date each other. Now, again, the movie goes back and forth. These events don't necessarily play out the way I'm explaining them. We get some of the stuff in the future. We get a lot of background information in between the final tennis match between Art and Patrick, and this is just how the story plays out chronologically. So bear with me here. Via more flashbacks, we find out that the driving force of Art's uh, great professional career is Tashi. She's essentially poured all of her knowledge and as much of her skills as she can into Art, and he's become like this international tennis superstar. Then we get to a tournament that happens in Atlanta, and Patrick catches up with Tashi, and they are immediately like going at it. They're into each other. The sexual tension has immediately returned between them, and it's implied that they link up. It's also implied that Art saw them, but they kind of disappeared out of his line of vision, and he doesn't necessarily know what happened. This gets us to present day. Art is on his way out. He's ready to retire, or he at least should be ready to retire. But he's really kind of over the hill and tired at this point, and he wants to win one more big tournament before he hangs it up. Well, at least that's what I gathered before he just flat out said it. Patrick, on the other hand, is someone who's wasted his talent and he's kind of a loser, so to speak. He's very immature and he's just kind of bullshitting his way through life and again, wasting away his talents. By chance, these two find themselves in the same tournament, Tashi talked to Patrick before the tournament even started and essentially said, look, the only way you're going to play him is in the final because you all are on opposite sides of the bracket. And she essentially dismisses Patrick and storms out. Well, Patrick said, nah, fuck that. I'm playing him. And that comes down to the competitive edge and the mind games between the three. Tashi knows how to press both men's buttons. Again, I just told you, Patrick is a loser, but Tashi telling him that he wasn't going to make it to art just turned him into one of the greatest talents of all time, and he made it there. And it gets us to our final tennis match where these guys are going at it. It's a lot of mind games on the court. It's a lot of stuff, gamesmanship kind of off the court because there's a scene where they're in a sauna together and Patrick is trying to get in Art's head and Art kind of comes back and he's like, look, you're a fucking loser. There's nothing you can tell me that's going to throw me off my game. And in the backdrop of all of that, you have Tashi who fully believes that Patrick is gonna beat her husband yet again. So the tennis game gets rained out. They have some time. They can't finish the game, and everybody has to go back to their hotel room and chill. And this gets us to our final act, so to speak, where Art expresses to Tasha, "Hey, I want to retire. I want to hang this up. I'm done." And he begs Tashi for something to give him a competitive edge entering into that final game against Patrick the next day. And she begrudgingly says, if you lose this game tomorrow, I'm leaving you. Now, the interesting thing about that is Tashi is saying, I can't be out of tennis completely. I need a husband who's in tennis because I feel like if I was still in it, I wouldn't be looking at the end of my career. Art is saying you shouldn't, it comes off like he's testing, like, do you just love me because you're my tennis coach? Or do you love me because I'm your husband? And at one point, he tells her, I love you. And all she says is, I know. She never says throughout this entire film if she loved her husband or not. It's what her husband was on the court for her, which was essentially a proxy, that was the basis of this relationship. But in the same vein, you also understand that Tashi does care about Art as a person because she has a secret rendezvous with Patrick, and she asked Patrick to throw the game so that Art can win and essentially retire with some dignity. Which is what he said he was going to do. Like win, lose, or draw. Art was saying, "I'm getting up out of here." But competitively, if he loses to Patrick, Tashi knows that Art will have difficulty overcoming that mentally, and she just wants to keep his competitive drive going. So that gets us to our final game. And whoa, it was insane, man. Like this is really the crux of this entire movie. Like the whole movie is good to me, but this is where it really kind of brings it home. So earlier in the film, Art asks Patrick if he and Tashi slept together. Patrick refuses to answer. So Art says, look, serve the ball like me, and I'll accept that as you and Tashi slept together. Patrick does it, and that's the confirmation that he needs. Right before, which I believe it was, no, it wasn't match point. This was going to be a break. Right before Patrick serves the ball, he does it just like Art would do it, telling him yet again, I've slept with Tashi. And Art kind of loses his composure and they go on one last break and it gets us to our final game. And the final game is so intense, man. It's a back and forth. You're kind of on the edge of your seat. You don't know who's gonna win. And Tashi isn't even aware that Patrick has signaled to Art that they've slept together again. It's just pure chaos, man. It's drama in one of its purest forms, competitively. In a shot at the end that I thought was pretty cool, both Patrick and Art go to I think that's a volley maybe or spike the ball for the match point, and Art gets the best of them. But when they fall down, they kind of hug each other over the neck. And Tashi is celebrating the fact that Art was able to beat Patrick, and Patrick and Art are celebrating them coming back together as friends. And that's where the film essentially ends. And it's really interesting because this was a throuple throughout the whole thing, essentially. Like, I feel like they would have worked it out to where the three of them could be together. And I doubt we get a sequel to that, but in my mind, the sequel is about Tashi helping Patrick get his competitive edge back, and Art has retired and essentially become a house husband, so to speak. But yeah, overall, just the way they played the dynamics out of these three characters and this power throuple, for lack of a better way of putting it, I really enjoyed that element of the story, and it was a pleasant surprise. Like, I felt like this film was going to be good, but it actually exceeded my expectations in a lot of ways. So, challengers, have you seen it? Let me know what you think in the comments. Continue to like, continue to share, continue to subscribe. I appreciate everything you've done. And until next time, I'm Jarius, the Unapologetic Geek, and I am out.